The other day, I had the awesome opportunity to interview Ivan Yu, who's the creator of Vue.js as well as Vite, and we covered a lot in this conversation, including why he moved to Singapore, how he started Vite in the first place, as well as a little bit of Vue versus React discussion. So let's just get right into it.
I was originally born in China. I worked and lived in the United States for 15, 16 years before I moved to Singapore 2 years ago. So yeah, so it's been a bit over 2 years in Singapore, and I'm loving it here. So everything is great. Thank you.
So the first question I had was, why did you move to Singapore?
Yeah, I do get asked that a lot. Yeah, so I think for me it's a lot of it is just personal family preferences. So I've lived and worked in the US for 15, 16 years, as I said. But I started doing full-time open source in 2016. So during that time, and I started working remote in around like 2014. So I've been like working fully remote, fully at home for 10 years now. And when you get used to that, I realize like I no longer am really like geologically confined to any one place, right? As long as I have a legal status in the place, I can just go there and work there. It doesn't really matter where I stay anymore. So but I'm stayed in the U.S. still for many years, mostly because it's quite stable. My wife still worked there. But later on, after we had kids, and then there's COVID, and during COVID, I think COVID was kind of like the trigger moment for me. I was feeling like once I got completely cut off, and just I have to stay in my home all the way. And I realized like there's nothing too much in the U.S. that makes me that happy, right? Outside of and in a way, because I grew up in cities in China. And I always liked city environments. But again, like moving back to China seems, a bit risky in certain aspects. So I wanted to find a place where there is a good, healthy mix of Western and Eastern culture, still international, allow me to get exposed to a very diverse group of people, and also a bit closer to family in China. So yeah, so Singapore, actually, Jinzheng here told me about the Tech Pass program, the Singapore Open, like 2 years ago. So I was like, oh, this looks like it's like designed for me. So then I came here. Yeah.
You said Tech Pass.
Yeah, it's a special visa program for like tech entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Interesting. So, coming from an Asian background myself, I'm curious if you feel more comfortable in a more Asian environment.
I would say, I still consider myself a foreigner here, right? Like Singapore has its own very, local culture and everything. I won't pretend that I know everything about Singapore at this point. But of course, like there are a lot of like people coming from mainland China, people from United States. So I feel very comfortable here, I would say. Like everybody I talk to, like I know there's something that connect us in common. I mean, in the US, I wouldn't say I'm not uncomfortable, but like I would say I never really had the strong urge to like Americanize myself. Yeah.
Right, that makes sense to me. So continuing on the Singapore topic a little bit more, what was your impression after you moved here? Was it just like you expected?
In a lot of ways, I think work-wise, it didn't change too much because most of the work we do is online. Actually, it made certain things a bit easier because we have a lot of team members based in Asia time zones. So that actually made some meetings easier. That made other meetings more difficult because now every time I have a meeting with people in the US, it's like either like 8 in the morning or like 10 in the evening. But other than that, life-wise, everything is pretty great. I would say everything is great except it's getting more and more expensive. Kids' education is actually good because I think one of the reasons is for the kids' education. I feel like I want them to grow up in an environment where they get exposed to both Western culture and Eastern culture. I don't want them to be sort of like narrow-minded into a monoculture environment. And I think Singapore is a great place for you to, get just see there are different people all living here in this tiny city, but you see people from everywhere, basically. Right? So, and what else? I think I actually got a bit more new friends in social-wise, like a lot of kids' parents who also work in the tech industry. Happen to know a lot of people from China also. Like, I met some unexpected connections here. I would say that those are pleasant surprises. Yeah.
Nice. So something I learned about Vue after I came here, a few days ago, is that it's being used by some of the bigger Chinese companies, which I find interesting. I guess, I don't know if I should say this, but the big elephant in the room is React, right? It is the most popular framework at the moment in North America, at least. But I know that Vue is popular in certain regions, maybe certain industries, I'm not sure, like in certain places in Europe, as I said, for certain Asian companies. Do you have any thoughts, comments on that?
So I think one thing about React is it's popular. I think one big reason is it has a very strong kind of I don't know how to describe it in English, but it's like starting from Facebook, and all those people who previously worked at Facebook went out and started startups, and then you have all these other fellow companies in Silicon Valley where they're like, oh, like Facebook is doing this, it must be good, right? Netflix was like one of the earliest adopters of React and really helped push it. So this kind of network effect in US, Silicon Valley, Bay Area, tech companies, this kind of network effect is super strong. And Vue has always played this kind of underdog path where we're independent, we have no big company backing, everything is community-based, word of mouth. But I think there's a big misconception around Vue's popularity in terms like, oh, it's like only popular in China, or oh, it's only popular in certain industries. I think it's pretty widespread. And surprisingly, I think, so there are a lot of different kind of cases. Some of those are public facing, some of those are internal facing, right? So a lot of companies use Vue for like internal dashboard. They don't even talk about publicly. This is very, very prevalent in China. But in fact, I think it's actually focused in the medium to small business group sectors. A lot of these large companies in China are like mostly React nowadays. I think for big companies, it's very natural for them to make decisions to just like, you don't want to get fired for choosing a tech stack. So it's like in the old days, people choose IBM just so it's like a safe bet. React is that safe bet for a lot of people. If they really don't know what to choose, they just choose React for safety, right? They don't want to take the responsibility because they can just point fingers and say like everybody else is using React. So if there's a problem, it's these engineers' problem, not because of me choosing a wrong stack that made their lives harder. I think that's just the way it is. But outside that, I think Vue is actually doing surprisingly well in certain sectors. Like it's weird, but a lot of these luxury brands, watch brands, like their front ends are like there are a lot of them using Vue, like Louis Vuitton and like all these like maybe 5 out of 10 famous watch brands are using Vue for their front ends. And then there are public companies like GitLab, which has completely built their front end around Vue. And there are also, I mean, in China, it is indeed popular, say like Ping An Group or Huawei. They do use Vue very, very extensively. And in North America, I would agree, like React is definitely much, much more popular there. But we found that Vue is, I guess, outside of US, like in Europe, we know like Maersk, which is like the largest logistics company in the world. They're all Vue. Wikimedia is all Vue. So there are large organizations that's outside of North America that's very heavily reliant on Vue as their whole like infrastructure instead of their companies. And in a way, we don't talk about this a lot because you find a lot of these companies are not like the kind of like trendy Silicon Valley tech companies that would send DevRels out to the world, tell them about like, hey, look, we are using Vue, like we're proud of that, like. But it's like it was a trendy thing to do for a company to send their engineers out to tech conferences and say, we migrated our stack over to React. It's great, you know. Like you don't see that about Vue that much, maybe because just like the industry sector that has saturated in, people usually don't do that. And I think that has to do with the low barrier of entry with Vue because in a lot of ways, you don't really need to be a JS expert or a Vue expert to actually work with it efficiently. That's the strength of it, right? That makes it easier for these non-tech focused enterprise to adopt Vue. But at the same time, these companies don't really go out of their way to promote what tech stack they're using.
You know, like the other day I visit SIG China website and they didn't even change the favicon. So I see, oh, now I know SIG China is using Vue. So because they are using the Vue favicon, and SIG is actually one of the most famous investment company in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. And some anecdotes, because we recently ended support for Vue 2, right? So we do have a program where people can reach out to say, like, we still using Vue 2, we want to, you know, have expanded support for it. So a lot of these companies, we never knew they were using Vue until they reached out. Like in Singapore even, like I think it's either NTU or NUS, like they actually reached out to us, like saying, we have some programs that's built using Vue, and what do we do about it? And I was like, I didn't know you guys are using it.
Yeah, I hope the government will reduce some of your tax, you know.
Oh yeah, like IRAS's website uses Vue.
Okay, we know about the reasons why Evan came to Singapore. How about you, Weki? Like, how do you feel for the few days you stay here about Singapore?
Right. So I am pretty new here. You know, like you said, only for a few days, but it's if I could summarize my experience here in one phrase, it would be too hot outside, too cold inside.
Which is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And?
So other than that, you know, my experience here has been pretty positive. You know, the food has been pretty good. I've been enjoying it. I guess the nature of it, the cityscape, I enjoy it too. I heard that it's really safe here, and I feel safe, and that's something I enjoy too.
Okay. You posted a lot of videos about pacing and algorithm, and you asked about Evan about Vue.js and React.js. And what's your view about Vue.js and React.js from the backend view? Yeah.
Right. So generally, my advice for people who want to get a job in, I would say North America in particular, is to first consider React, because it is the dominant framework at the moment in North America, I should emphasize. But it is a personal choice, right? You know, I think in general, when choosing a framework or a piece of tech, it's more about what you do with it, you know, the problem you solve, and less about the tech itself. So, you know, I think the short answer would be just find what works for you.
Okay, so will you encourage people to use Vue.js when you when you go back to Vancouver?
I think what I've generally said in the past, you know, not so much recently, but is, and you could correct me if you disagree with me, is that if you want something that's easier to get into, then something like Vue or Svelte would be a better choice than React, because React can be kind of, it's a lot of stuff to get into.
Okay. I heard about Evan have some questions want to ask Weki as well. So what do you want to ask Weki then?
I just want to add a few things about telling people what to use, right? I don't think we should tell people what to use. I think realistically, if it depends on your goals, right? If you're looking for a job, it makes sense. You go with the most popular option because there are just more opportunities out there. But I think at the same time, I would always encourage people to not lock themselves into a sort of single framework kind of developer. I don't think that's going to be healthy for their long-term career path because the industry changes really fast, right? And in a lot of ways, there are a lot of very specific things about frameworks that you might need to learn to use that specific framework efficiently, but maybe it doesn't really apply anywhere else, right? So you're investing a lot of time for these specific things. But at the same time, if you explore multiple different options, it doesn't have to be Vue, right? Like solid, svelte, other things, or even like HTMX, right? You try these different paradigms, you try to generalize and see the connections between them. I think that helps them a lot more than just be forever deep into a single stack, like as a developer. Like it gives you a more architecture level sort of perspective on the front end, rather than just being an implementer of very specific tasks. I think it's better for their long-term growth in a way.
Nice. Thank you. And you have some questions you want to ask YK as well?
Yeah, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so totally agree with it. What I wanted to ask or add on the Vue versus React conversation from earlier is, what I find pretty strong about React is the whole ecosystem. Vercel with Next.js, and there's obviously Vite now too, and there's React Native, and I know Vue has some of that too. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, so a lot of people say that. I think in reality, there are very there are misconceptions mixed with just unfamiliarity. I think framework ecosystem has sort of a threshold you cross. Once you cross that threshold, the marginal gain of a bigger ecosystem actually starts to decrease. And to a certain point, I would say too many options isn't necessarily a good thing, especially for beginners. It's like I was recently researching home coffee setups. I'm just completely overwhelmed because there are so many different things to choose from. In Vue, I think for some of the most critical pieces, we mostly have one blessed solution that is very well maintained, and it's like very aligned with the core philosophy of Vue. And then outside of that, we did have some setbacks during the Vue 2 to Vue 3 transition because a lot of the old libraries supporting Vue 2 were kind of just, unfortunately, kind of got deprecated along the way. But with the Vue 3 ecosystem maturing, we are seeing basically everything you can think of in the React ecosystem. We have a pretty close equivalent. Also, even for 3D stuff, we have Trust.js, which is the 3JS wrapper for Vue. We have people have ported Shatsy and Radix to Vue as well. So I think in a lot of cases, the ecosystem is large enough to pretty much have a solution for everything you want. I think usually you feel the pain point when you run into very, very niche things like drag and drop. I think that's something we still need to improve on, but it really depends on how niche of a problem domains you delve into. I definitely React ecosystem still has advantage in that case, but I think this kind of a difference is often exaggerated because a lot of React devs simply don't know there are equivalent solutions in the Vue ecosystem.
Right. So I think a natural question, based on that is if a company is trying to decide what framework to use, they might have used different frameworks before. They might be a luxury watch company or government tech, whatever that might be. How would you advise them to choose a framework?
I would say, so there are, I think for a lot of these companies, really the choice comes down to the hiring part. People would think there are more devs who know React, so it's easier to hire React devs. But I would argue that React is harder to master. So given 1,000 React developers, I would say only maybe 100 of them actually knows React that well. But it's gotten so difficult these days. I think if in an interview, if you ask the React developer to explain to you why use effect has to run twice, I don't know honestly. But I think one advantage of Vue is that you can really just find a competent JavaScript developer, and they can pick it up and learn it. And not having to spend too much time about the framework's specific idiosyncrasies, because in a lot of ways, React is the only one that tries to go against the grains of the host language it is implemented in. Like, if you look at like all the other frameworks, right? Pretty much everyone has converged on Signals. And I think that's because Signals is just much more in alignment with the mutable nature, imperative nature of JavaScript. And when you learn the language first and you then move one level up to a signal-based reactivity system, like the one Vue uses, Signal uses, the one that Svelte is also kind of convergent into, right? I think this aligns much better with the default path you're on. In React, you basically have to like kind of turn your head around and say, this is now the React way of doing things. Everything you learned previously about JavaScript, like some of them still apply. Some of them, like you now need to realize this function actually runs multiple times instead of just one time. I'm going off track here, but like I think there's just if you take the cost of actually hiring someone who's good at their job and then getting them up to speed with the framework choice here, I think Vue could be a more like economical choice, especially if you don't have a wide funnel of these like React-ready developers here.
Right, that's super interesting to hear. And you know, I've heard, I think, your story of starting Vue in the first place, so I'm not going to ask you that here. But I haven't heard your story of starting Vite. If you could get into that, that'd be great.
Sure. So for Vite, it started as my frustration with the tool chain that we were using for Vue. We had a solution called Vue CLI, which was Webpack based. So I think, personally for me, it was my over-engineering moment where we just did too much in the CLI, because we felt like, some people like that, but I've always felt the CLI did too much. We tried to abstract too much on top of Webpack, which is already complex. The build performance was getting frustrating and everything. So the initial idea was to just do a simple dev server that would transform a Vue component on the fly as the HTTP request comes in, and then just send the JavaScript back. And that started as a prototype that worked out really well, and I realized halfway point that it doesn't have to be Vue specific. It could be just a general dev server that uses this approach with native ES module imports. There were a few other solutions exploring the same approach at that time. So there was Snowpack, there was ES Dev Server, and Vite. But Vite was the first one to actually implement hot module replacement with this paradigm, because that was kind of the table stakes for Vue CLI and the Webpack-based solution. So I felt like this is the thing to crack if we want to make this whole paradigm actually work. And once we had that, I think Vite really just kind of exploded after we decided to make it framework agnostic, because people realized we also intentionally made the configuration as minimal as possible, because that's just all these work we did over the years with Webpack. We realized like a lot of these, even different frameworks like React, Vue, Svelte, we have all converged on the same set of lower level configurations that nowadays devs just take for granted. If that's the case, why do you still want them to configure it by themselves? Why don't we just make it work out of the box? So Vite kind of became the out of the box replacement for Vue CLI, for Create React App. And then we see other frameworks adopting it because they realize, hey, we don't want to reinvent the wheels. Why do we have to? Why does everyone have to ship their own Webpack configurations when you can just use Vite? So I think that convergence just happened. So we see Svelte, Solid, and then slowly we see new frameworks starting to build on top of Vite. Astro was actually made by the same team that made Snowpack, and they just ended up deciding to switch over to Vite because they don't want to spend time on a bundler. And then we have Quick and Remix just recently moved over to Vite as well. So overall, I think it's just again like similar to Vue. I just was scratching my own itch, and turns out it's something that people needed.
Nice. I think I want to ask you the same question about this topic than as the one I asked earlier about Vue. When it comes to these build systems and things like that, how would you advise a company to choose one?
I think at this point, there are. So when it comes to developer experience, I would say the only legit choices now are really Vite and maybe some Rust-based bundlers like RSPack. And if you have a really heavy Webpack configuration that's legacy and you want to just get faster builds, RSPack would be the easier adoption path. But if you're have greenfield projects, you want to just have a leaner setup, or you're already planning to adopt a framework that's Vite-based, then there's really not much debate there. Our goal is to obviously try to make Vite the ideal solution for all cases. So I would admit that in some extreme cases, like where you have like 10,000 modules unbundled in a dev server, Vite can be a bit challenging in certain cases. But we are working on things to improve that. So in the long run, we do hope that Vite will become the universal solution to reduce the friction for the entire front-end space.
Nice. I feel like I've asked most of the stuff I wanted to ask. I'm curious if the audience has any questions or if we have questions from Anne. We'll see.
Yeah, because I want Evan said he has some questions for you, so I want to dig some secrets.
Okay.
Like,
yeah. Okay. I'll ask the question everyone wants to ask.
Being a YouTuber as like 1.92 million followers, that's my future. Yeah.
So when you have that many subscribers on YouTube, like how do you manage the community? Like how do you like split your attention? Like how do you get like user feedback?
Right. So it is a challenge, and I should say I was kind of slow on YouTube for a while, but I still kept posting a lot on other platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, things like that. And the way I see, you can't respond to everyone. That's not possible. And other people try, but I don't even try. But what I do is I read comments, I listen to people. I sometimes talk to people directly on like live audio events or on things like this, and then try to basically listen, understand people. And to me, that's all what it comes down to. So Anne, you were asking about like how do you grow your YouTube channel, and ultimately it's all about listening. And it might sound kind of funny because you're talking on YouTube, you're not like listening to other people necessarily when you record, but you do need to listen to the feedback, the comments and things like that, the market, where the market is going. And then once you have that understanding, choosing what topic to make a video for is going to be easier, or a blog post or whatever you do. People might think, you got to have like good equipment, you got to have good mic. These things are true in a way, but the more important thing is, again, listening, understanding the market, and basically talking about the right topics.
Right. So speaking of topics, did you start your YouTube content have you ever did pivot in terms of topic since you started?
Right. You could say I've pivoted multiple times because I've covered a lot. I started with coding interviews, getting into FANG, stuff like that, and then people started to ask me for more beginner-oriented tutorials. So I did Python tutorials. I did a few JavaScript ones, and people started to ask me things like, what's the difference between software engineering and computer science degrees? I didn't know, so I did some research, made a video about that, just stuff like that.
So on the business side, is YouTube your main source of income, or do you have a more diverse sort of business model?
Right. So at the moment, it's not my full-time job. Okay. I have a separate full-time job at the moment. I did YouTube full-time for a while, and people have asked me about this too. And I'll try to answer sort of most frequently asked questions, so I don't have to repeat my answers in the future. Basically, about half of my revenue was coming from YouTube directly, AdWords, AdSense, whatever it's called. Basically, people would, I think, bid a certain amount of money for, like a certain amount of views on my videos or on videos in general on YouTube. That's how I got paid. And then part of it was also affiliate marketing, which means you send people to a product and you get paid like a commission. Part of it was, creating courses. So the different, sources of income, but mostly from YouTube. And then people ask me like, oh, why did you slow down on your YouTube? Like, why did you stop posting? A couple of reasons. One was I wanted to get more inspiration. I felt like I already shared a lot about what I already knew, so I wanted to learn more, basically have more ideas for future videos. And then another one was working on your own. As an entrepreneur, you might be familiar with this. It gets kind of hard. If you have a team, that's better. It is getting sort of better for me, not having a team per se, but having a community to support me. So both of these things are getting better. I think that's one of the reasons why I started to make more videos recently, why I'm hopefully, making this video as well.
I see. Yeah, I was about to ask like whether you were doing it all alone or with a team. So you were doing it all alone.
Yes.
I see. And how much time does it take to like start from conception to upload, like for a video, like on average?
Right. So when I was doing it full time, it was basically about a week, and I think that was pretty fast on YouTube, like tech YouTube standard. But what I would do is I would think about the content, do scripting and research for a couple of days, and then I would record, edit. Editing process would take about a day or two. I think recording, that might be a day. So that's like basically a whole week, 5 days or so.
I see. And you have to like keep it up like on a very consistent pace. I would imagine that would be a very like personally for me, like a lot of people have asked me to make video courses, but like whenever I think about like the whole process, I'm just like, no, it's not for me. Yeah, so yeah, I really admire people who have this sort of, I guess it's important that you have the passion for it, right? Because people, I think, for me, it's just impossible to keep this kind of pace of making videos, coming up with new ideas every week. But on the other hand, maybe it's, I somehow managed to keep, closing issues every day for like a couple of years. So I think it really, like you gotta have this kind of passion for it. And I can totally understand like sometimes you're like, I want to have a change of pace, slow it down, and just refresh on the inspiration part. Like, yeah, I think there's a lot of things in common when we are just doing it for the long term, and especially when in a lot of cases, if you're working remote, you do need to have this sort of I don't know, like manage your own sort of avoid burnout and making sure you have the motivation to keep it going, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I was sort of thinking prior to this conversation, we have some things in common. We, like we talked about earlier, we both have Asian backgrounds. Obviously, we both worked at Google for a while. But I think the difference, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but is that one of the differences is that I'm more of an extrovert. I think you're more of an introvert. And depending on your nature, depending on like what you're good at, what you're attracted to, you're just naturally attracted to different things. You're naturally good at different things. So kind of doing something that aligns with that strength of yours is important in general.
Definitely, yeah. I think for me, I really kind of just fell onto this path because I tried to stay in my comfort zone as much as possible. So in a way, I think it's right. People always say you need to like try things out of your comfort zone, but at the same time, I think if you want to do it consistently for a very long time, you still need to find that right border of comfort zone so that you don't actually put yourself into a territory where you just won't be able to do it consistently.
I got a real good questions from the audience, and I think both you two can answer. Because you got 140K followers on Twitter, right? And you got 300K plus if I count the Chinese account as well, it's like much more than 300K. And people want to know, do you get annoyed by the people from Twitter?
I can take this one. The answer is no.
Okay.
And that's because I've developed really thick skin.
Okay, good here. And how about Evan?
I sometimes still do, you know, because I don't know why, but like occasionally, like especially in the Chinese community, there are some people who really like to make snarky comments about technology, and I've also developed a really thick skin. Like in a lot of cases, I'm like, whatever, like just use whatever you want, right? But then sometimes, you know, some people would really just kind of nasty comments sometimes. So I just try to, like, I would admit, like, you really wouldn't want to do anything with those people, but sometimes, like, just seeing that, it can kind of really ruin your day in some cases, you know. But again, like, usually it doesn't really last longer than a day nowadays. Yeah.
Right. So I'll talk about my approach. Hopefully it's going to be helpful for some people here. One is the mute button is your friend, not the block button. And the reason is because I still want people to be able to read my stuff, but I don't want people to necessarily be able to attack me. So the mute button, you know, I find that it's a good middle ground, generally speaking, unless it's like a real spam or stuff like that, or scam. And then another one is meditation helps. Just being able to, you know, kind of breathe and calm down and think about other things, basically.
You haven't found that button yet.
Yeah. I muted a lot of people already. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, you know, there are some friends who will be like, dude, look at this tweet. Like someone is saying nasty things again. I'm like, don't send this to me. Yeah. Sometimes they do that. So I'm like, don't send this to me. Like,
Okay, I do get a question from the audience. Hey, Evan, have you memorized like what copy to order?
what
Yeah,
copy?
that's the question. I didn't really collect this. Yeah.
Unfortunately, no. Because I mostly work at home, so I'm like just too lazy to go out to get coffee. So I'm like, now actually I'm like deep in the finding the right espresso machine kind of stage right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Do come talk with Evan later because he has this hobby about coffee machines. If you like this, you have something.
I don't think I need more suggestions at this point. I'm like completely overwhelmed. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait. So I saw this tweet.
Yeah.
You basically said you were trying to choose a coffee machine, so many options. It's harder than choosing a JavaScript framework, right?
It is. Because I think like for frameworks, it's like you're more or less all solving the same kind of problems, right? But for coffee machines, it's like, are you just like trying to get a quick bang for the buck? Do you want to go higher level, or do you want to like get a dual boiler? Do you want to go to like picking specific bursts for your grinder? Like it's like just infinite levels of like different levels of dedication. And I'm like constantly like hovering between like, I just want a quick cup of coffee, but maybe I should get a better one. You know, it's like that kind of things make it really hard.
Okay. Thank you for the coffee topic. Like, I got some questions for Waiki. Like, how long did you spend to get your like 10K followers? The first 10K.
Right. So the first 7K I remember pretty, you know, vividly because I did it while I worked at Google as a part-time thing. I only posted a few videos and I got 7K subscribers. I don't think that's possible nowadays, but you know, at that moment, not a lot of people were doing what I was doing, so I was able to do that. And then, you know, to kind of answer a question that didn't quite get asked is, you know, to get to 100K, I think it took me, I don't remember exactly, but it was, if I remember correctly, it was less than 1 year of doing it full time.
Wow, impressive. Yeah, people love you. So, do you have any suggestion for a beginner to run their own channel?
Right. So first of all, I'll address that quick comment about people love me. People don't love me. People love the content I created, and I think there's a huge difference there. And that love might like kind of spill over to me sometimes, but it's more about basically solving people's problems. People have problems. People have their own desires and things like that. When you solve their problems, when you solve their desires, help them get jobs and stuff like that, then that's sort of when the magic happens, in my opinion.
Okay.
For beginners, I would say start small. YouTube is probably not the right platform to start right away. If you make a video, if only like a couple people watch the video, or like if you get 0 views, you might get discouraged. So a better way to start, in my opinion, is through either blog, by writing blog posts on different platforms, so you get some views there, or on Twitter, LinkedIn, or on live streaming platforms. So whatever you feel comfortable, or I guess TikTok nowadays, whatever you feel comfortable with, start there and then kind of go from there.
Do you think there is a learning curve about becoming a YouTuber? What do you think the learning curve for you or for others?
Right. So obviously there is a learning curve. And again, I want to emphasize this point about being a good listener. That might seem like a simple thing, but it is a really hard thing to learn. You can learn it by basically talking to people, individually. So again, there's the mechanics of like, having the right equipment, having good mics, things like that, knowing how to edit. All of that kind of comes from a more fundamental skill, or a fundamental set of skills. One of them is listening. Another one is just knowing what good content is. Watching a lot of YouTube videos is actually helpful for that, and kind of thinking about what makes good content.
Okay. Evan want to ask him something about this part?
I'm not making the YouTube videos, so yeah. But I do sometimes wish we had some people like create some content for like you. We found, I think this has a lot to do with the natural talent, or just being comfortable with thinking in this direction. So we found some active community members who are just happy to do this kind of work. So we're trying to. So for me, it's really trying to find this kind of people and encourage them to do that kind of thing. But maybe they can learn some tips from you.
Yeah, let me know if you wanna, if you need help finding those people.
Yeah.
I might know 1 or 2 people.
Nice.
So I got some questions Evan may answer before, but I still want to, it is funny, like I am using React for development. Can you persuade me to switch to Vue? Yeah.
Have you run into effect running twice?
Okay. Thank you. So, will there be an international mobile application development in the future, similar to React Native in Vue?
So the closest thing is native script plus Vue 3. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here is another question. I am afraid of the idea of having a strong online presence. But at the same time, I want to be more connected with the community. Do you have any advice for this audience, both of you?
So the question I would ask this person is, why are you afraid? Are you afraid of something specific? But based on just this question alone, what I would say is you could have an anonymous account. That's a thing people do. Like even on YouTube, there are some really big YouTubers that never show their face. They just show like certain parts of their body, but never their face. There are like VTubers too. There are different ways of going about it. But on top of that, once you feel comfortable with it, really think about like what are the risks, what are the ways to kind of mitigate those risks. If you're worried about your physical safety, if you're worried about your mental safety, I mean, I want to say get over it, but I understand it can be kind of hard. If you're worried about physical safety, then think about how to kind of mitigate those risks.
How about you, Evan? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I would I think YK mostly said the similar things. My suggestion is maybe use an anime avatar. You'll be fine.
Okay, that's a really good one. So here's another thing for Evan and Marcos, WebAssembly developer. There's a proverb, whatever I'm writing in WebAssembly will be in WebAssembly. So will Vue.js be writing in WebAssembly?
Unlikely, because so I think the problem with this assumption that you want your front-end framework to be in WebAssembly is largely misplaced, because in reality, if you look at the compile whatever language, for example, Rust to WebAssembly kind of frameworks, you see their performance is the real bottleneck is in the DOM, because they can't really bypass the DOM, right? So it only makes certain parts of your application logic faster, but at what cost? You'd have a completely opaque binary at runtime that you don't really get to look at the stack trace when something goes wrong. And that actually makes debugging, deploying, and everything much, much more difficult.
Okay, so what's your thoughts on where Vue sits in the framework landscape with regard to web performance?
In performance, I think Vue is in general in a pretty decent place. I would say it's already good enough for most of the use cases you'd want. In fact, most mainstream frameworks probably are good, except for one. I would gauge it based on the possibility or the likeliness for things to go wrong in the hands of beginners, right? I think that's a very different metrics compared to benchmarks. And I think, in my honest opinion, Vue is in a pretty good place in that ranking. We're also trying to improve the performance in certain more demanding cases. For example, if you have like a table of 10,000 items, right? So Vue's current rendering model that requires virtual DOM does still have some overhead. So we're like working on the side. We have a project called Vapor Mode, which is more or less Solid.js inspired, that takes the template and compile it into something that's more directly dealing with the DOM without an abstraction layer. And I think that should get us as close to bare DOM performance as possible. So yeah, I think we're in a pretty good place, but there are still room to improve.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's a question. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think before we go into the next question, I want to ask this question that I ask in this kind of thing pretty much every time, which is, we can address more questions, but just for YouTube, I guess. Do you have any final thoughts based on our conversation so far?
Final thoughts? I think there are a lot of things in common, as we are sort of like independent creators of things that requires a long-term dedication. So I definitely drew a lot of inspiration from this conversation, and I've always been fascinated about different career paths, especially the more unconventional ones. I mean, nowadays there are a lot of YouTubers, but I think it's still very different from what most people would imagine. For it to be someone who just sort of, you're now in charge of whatever you do and trying to carve a path for yourself. Like even within the YouTuber, you have different content lanes that you need to focus on, and there are competitions. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things I learned from this conversation, and yeah, I would love to just keep in touch and pick your brains for a few other things in the future.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I will try to answer this question myself too. And one thing I noticed online, but here as well about you in particular is your humility. I feel like even though you've had like this big success, a lot of people are using tools that you've created, both of them, right, Vue and Vite. But you still have this like really grounded approach. You care a lot about your family and your kids' educations, things like that. That might sound kind of silly, but to me that's something I can learn from, and that's something I think a lot of people can learn from as well. Because I think,
Thank you.
Because I think when you're humble, when you stay grounded, then honestly, you're less likely to make mistakes. When you get arrogant, when you feel like you're doing everything right, then you might become less careful. You might start to treat people in a not an ideal way. So I guess one takeaway from this conversation from Ivan for me is to stay humble.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And that concludes part 1 of this discussion. In part 2 of this discussion, where we talked for about 50 more minutes about many different topics, including how to stay competitive in the current market, how to contribute to open source, some advice by Ivan there, how important is leak code really, as well as thriving in the age of LLMs, ChatGPT, Copilot, all of these things. So if you want to check that part, feel free to become a member of this channel because I just uploaded it for members only.